The video appeared on Thaddeus Mercer's feed at precisely 10:37 p.m. on a Tuesday night. It was grainy, shot from a shaky smartphone, but the content was unmistakable. Councilman Royce Caldwell, the self-proclaimed people's champion of Lakewood, slipping an envelope to a building inspector outside the condemned Riverside apartments. The inspector pocketed the envelope, nodded, and within seconds, both men disappeared into their respective vehicles. "Holy shit," Thad whispered, replaying the video for the third time. The timestamp showed it had been recorded just hours earlier. The post already had thousands of views, but was quickly being buried under reports of violation. Someone was working overtime to keep this hidden. If you're witnessing corruption in your community right now, hit that subscribe button. This story might just give you the courage to take action. As a former Army intelligence specialist, Thad knew exactly what he was looking at. For months, residents of the predominantly immigrant Riverside community had complained about unsafe conditions in their apartments: exposed wiring, black mold, structural damage from the floods 2 years ago. Yet somehow, every inspection came back clean. Meanwhile, Caldwell had been pushing to redevelop the entire neighborhood into luxury condos, a plan that would displace hundreds of families. This video was the missing piece. Thad's phone buzzed with a notification that the original post had been removed. The user who uploaded it, an account called Truth Seeker, had gone silent. Within minutes, their entire profile vanished from every platform. That night, Thad couldn't sleep. The faces of the Riverside residents he'd interviewed for his freelance reporting job kept floating through his mind. Mrs. Alvarez with her 3 young children sleeping in a bedroom where rainwater seeped through the ceiling. Mr. Nguyen, a Vietnam veteran like Thad's father, showing him the mold creeping up his bathroom walls, worsening his respiratory problems. Thad stared at his ceiling fan as it spun lazily above his bed. Something inside him had shifted. He'd spent too long documenting problems and not enough time solving them. Tomorrow would be different. If you've ever felt that moment when you know you need to act, give this video a thumbs up. That moment changes everything. Lakewood was a city of 300,000 nestled between rolling hills and a winding river that gave the town its name. Once a thriving manufacturing hub, it had reinvented itself over the past decade as a technology corridor, attracting young professionals and creating an uncomfortable divide between the city's old guard and its newcomers. Thaddeus "Thad" Mercer straddled both worlds. At 34, he'd returned to his hometown after 8 years in the military and another 4 working for a digital media company in Chicago. Lakewood had changed, but the power structures remained eerily familiar. The same families that had run things in his childhood still pulled the strings. They just had sleeker websites and social media accounts now. 3 days after seeing the video, Thad launched Guardian Watch, a simple website and social media presence dedicated to government transparency in Lakewood. Its first post was a carefully researched piece on the Riverside apartment situation, including public records of failed inspections that mysteriously became passes, campaign contributions from the developer to Caldwell's re-election fund, and testimonials from residents. He didn't include the video. He couldn't prove its authenticity yet. But he described its contents and asked if anyone had a copy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. "Man, I thought I was the only one seeing this stuff," wrote one commenter. "My cousin works at City Hall and says Caldwell has been on the take for years," wrote another. By the end of the week, Guardian Watch had over 5,000 followers. By the end of the month, it had become Lakewood's most trusted source for local political news, a digital town square where citizens shared evidence of corruption, nepotism, and abuse of power. Thad had struck a nerve, and Councilman Caldwell had noticed. Royce Caldwell came from old Lakewood money. His grandfather had owned the paper mill that employed half the town until it closed in the 1980s. His father had transitioned the family fortune into real estate, buying up properties during the subsequent economic downturn. Royce himself had been born into privilege and power, graduating from an Ivy League school before returning to Lakewood to continue the family legacy. At 48, he had the polished appearance of a man who had never known hardship, perfect teeth, tailored suits, and a politician's practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been on the city council for 15 years and had his sights set on the mayor's office next. The first time Thad met Caldwell in person was at a public forum on the Riverside redevelopment plan. Thad had come prepared with questions about the suspicious inspections. When he finally got his turn at the microphone, Caldwell's smile didn't falter for a second. "Mr. Mercer, is it? I'm familiar with your website." Caldwell's voice dripped with condescension. "While I appreciate citizen journalism, I'm concerned about the spread of misinformation. Those inspection reports you've published are incomplete drafts that were corrected after further review. If you'd reached out to my office, we could have provided you with the correct information." It was a masterful deflection, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged. The audience murmured uncertainly. "Councilman," Thad replied, "I submitted 3 public records requests for the final reports. All were denied." Caldwell's smile tightened. "Bureaucracy can be frustratingly slow sometimes. I'll have my office expedite those for you." The audience applauded Caldwell's apparent transparency. Only Thad noticed how the councilman's knuckles whitened as he gripped the podium. The next day, Thad received a phone call from the editor at the Lakewood Chronicle. His freelance contract was being terminated effective immediately. "Budget cuts," they said. "Nothing personal." That same afternoon, a building inspector arrived at Thad's small rental house, citing an anonymous complaint about code violations. The battle lines had been drawn. "He can't actually condemn your house for having Christmas lights up in March," said Leila Sharma, sliding a coffee across the table to Thad. "But the message is clear. You've gotten under his skin." They were sitting in Dharma Cafe, a small coffee shop that Leila's parents had opened when they immigrated from India 20 years earlier. The name had always intrigued Thad, and today he finally asked about it. "Dharma doesn't translate perfectly into English," Leila explained, her dark eyes thoughtful. "It's about duty, righteousness, the moral order of the universe. My parents believed that everyone has a dharma, a purpose they're meant to fulfill. Theirs was creating a space where people could connect." At 32, Leila was already one of Lakewood's most respected civil rights attorneys. She'd returned after law school to advocate for the community that had raised her. Her parents' cafe had become an unofficial headquarters for local activists, and Leila herself had taken on numerous cases against the city, including representing several Riverside residents. "So what's your dharma?" Thad asked. Leila smiled. "Justice, balance, making sure power doesn't go unchecked." She took a sip of her chai. "What's yours?" Thad considered the question. "Truth, I guess. Transparency, making sure people know what's happening around them so they can make informed decisions." "Then it looks like our paths align," Leila said. "Guardian Watch is making waves, Thad." But Caldwell isn't going to back down easily. He has too much invested in this Riverside deal. "What do you know about it?" Leila lowered her voice. The developer, Suncrest Properties, is actually a subsidiary of Caldwell Holdings, a company technically owned by Royce's brother-in-law, but we all know who's really in charge. If the Riverside redevelopment goes through, they stand to make tens of millions. And the current residents? Minimal relocation assistance. Many will end up leaving Lakewood altogether. They can't afford anything else in town with how property values have skyrocketed. Thad's jaw tightened. "We need to stop this." "That's why I wanted to meet," Leila said, pulling out her laptop. "I've been gathering evidence for months for a potential class action, but without proof of the falsified inspections, it's mostly circumstantial." "What if we could find that proof?" Thad asked. "What if we could show exactly how Caldwell is manipulating the system?" Leila's eyes lit up. "Then we'd have a case." a real one. If you believe in standing up for your community, hit that like button right now. Together, we can make a difference. Over the next several weeks, Guardian Watch transformed from a simple watchdog site into a community movement. Thad and Leila coordinated their efforts. She provided legal expertise while he built the digital infrastructure to protect their growing network of whistleblowers and citizen journalists. Anonymous tips began flooding in. A clerk from the building department sent redacted emails showing Caldwell pressuring inspectors. A junior staffer at Suncrest leaked preliminary designs for the Riverside redevelopment that had been dated months before the first failed inspection. Each piece added to the puzzle. Meanwhile, Guardian Watch expanded its focus. They began looking into other Caldwell projects, uncovering a pattern of corruption that stretched back years. The water treatment contract awarded to his college roommate's company. The zoning changes that mysteriously favored his donors. The public parks sold to private developers at a fraction of their value. The site's following grew exponentially. Local television stations began referencing their findings. The Lakewood Chronicle, once dismissive of Thad's work, now monitored Guardian Watch closely for leads. Caldwell's response escalated accordingly. Guardian Watch suffered multiple denial-of-service attacks. Thad's personal accounts were hacked. Leila received threatening letters at her office. Several Riverside residents who had spoken to them reported intimidation from their landlord. But the most effective counterattack came through more subtle means. Rumors began circulating about Thad's military service, suggestions that he had been discharged under questionable circumstances. Old photos appeared from his college days showing him at parties, wildly out of context. An ex-girlfriend suddenly gave an interview to a local blog claiming he had anger issues. None of it was true, but the whisper campaign took its toll. People began questioning Thad's motives. Was this really about corruption, or was it a personal vendetta? Was he truly a defender of the community, or an opportunist building a platform for himself? Even some Guardian Watch followers began to doubt. "This is classic," Leila said when Thad showed her the declining engagement metrics. Distract from the message by attacking the messenger. Caldwell knows exactly what he's doing. They were in Thad's living room, which had become their unofficial headquarters. Maps of Lakewood covered the walls, with red pins marking Caldwell-linked properties. Stacks of documents covered every surface. "It's working, though," Thad said, running a hand through his increasingly disheveled hair. "And we're running out of time. The council votes on the final Riverside approval next month." Leila placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember what I told you about Dharma? It's not just about doing the right thing. It's about doing it regardless of outcome, regardless of recognition. The truth matters, even when people don't want to hear it." Thad nodded, but the weight of the fight was taking its toll. He'd lost his freelance work, was burning through his savings, and now his reputation was being systematically dismantled. He believed in the cause, but for the first time, he wondered if they could actually win. Have you ever felt like giving up when fighting for what's right? Leave a comment below with what kept you going. The Guardian Watch office, previously known as Thad's Garage, was unusually crowded. What had started as a one-man operation now involved a rotating cast of volunteers, retired journalists fact-checking submissions, college students managing social media, Riverside residents translating materials into Spanish and Vietnamese. Today, they were hosting a strategy session ahead of the upcoming council vote. Leila was running through legal options when Thad's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Use the private key I gave you last month. You'll want to see this." Truth Seeker. Thad's heart raced. He hadn't heard from Truth Seeker, the original poster of the bribery video, since they'd disappeared months ago. He excused himself and went to his computer. The encrypted email contained a single video file. Thad entered the decryption key and pressed play. The footage showed Councilman Caldwell in what appeared to be a private office, meeting with three men Thad recognized as executives from Suncrest Properties. The timestamp showed it was from just 2 days ago. Once this vote passes, we can begin evictions immediately, Caldwell was saying. I've arranged for the court schedules to be expedited. What about the media attention? One executive asked. This Guardian Watch situation. Caldwell laughed. Mercer? He's finished. By next week, the Chronicle will run a piece about his dishonorable discharge, completely fabricated, of course, but his military records are sealed for national security reasons, so he can't disprove it easily. We've also arranged for some financial irregularities to appear in the Guardian Watch accounts. You can do that? Another executive asked, sounding impressed. Let's just say I have friends in the right places, Caldwell replied. The important thing is that by the time the vote happens, no one will believe a word he says. The video continued, detailing how they plan to minimize relocation assistance and maximize profits once the Riverside property was cleared. They discussed which council members were already in their pocket and which ones needed additional persuasion. It was the smoking gun they had been waiting for, complete, undeniable evidence of corruption, conspiracy, and contempt for the democratic process. Thad's hands shook as he called Leila over to watch. This is it, she whispered as the video ended. This is everything we need. Who do we take it to? Thad asked. The police? The FBI. Leila thought for a moment. Both, eventually. But first, she looked around at the volunteers watching them with curious expressions. First, we need to make sure this can't disappear. We need to make it public in a way that can't be ignored or buried. The council meeting, Thad said suddenly. It's the perfect venue. All the council members will be there, the press, community members. Leila nodded slowly. It's risky. Caldwell will try to shut it down immediately. Not if we coordinate it properly. Thad's mind was racing now. We need multiple people ready to share it from different accounts simultaneously. We need to make sure the original can't be traced back to Truth Course Seeker. And we need legal protection for ourselves, Leila added. I'll prepare emergency injunctions in case they try to stop us. For the first time in weeks, Thad felt a surge of hope. The path to justice was clear, if dangerous. Caldwell had crossed every line, broken every rule, and soon everyone would know. This is where courage meets preparation. If you're ready to see justice served, make sure you're subscribed for the next part of this incredible true story. The Lakewood City Council chambers were packed beyond capacity. The Riverside redevelopment vote had drawn hundreds of citizens, supporters in suits and business attire near the front, opponents, mostly Riverside residents, filling the back and spilling into the hallway. Thad and Leila had arrived early, stationing themselves and trusted volunteers at strategic points throughout the room. Each had been given specific instructions and precise timing. FBI agents, contacted the day before, were positioned discreetly near the exits, waiting for the evidence to be made public before moving in. Councilman Caldwell sat at the center of the elevated council table, looking confident in a crisp navy suit. If he noticed Thad and Leila, he gave no indication. Why would he? According to his timeline, Thad's reputation would be destroyed tomorrow. He had nothing to fear today. The meeting progressed with agonizing slowness through procedural matters and minor agenda items. Finally, Mayor Wilson announced, "We now move to the vote on Resolution 457 regarding the Riverside redevelopment project." Caldwell leaned forward to his microphone. Before we vote, I'd like to address some concerns that have been raised by residents. I know change can be frightening, but this project represents progress for all of Lakewood. The developer has generously offered relocation assistance to current residents, and the economic benefits of this project will— "Point of order, Mayor Wilson," Leila called out, rising from her seat. As an attorney known to the council, she was granted the floor. Before the council proceeds, I'd like to submit new evidence relevant to this vote, evidence of corruption that directly impacts the validity of this resolution. Caldwell's face darkened. "Mayor, this is an inappropriate attempt to delay a scheduled vote. Ms. Sharma has no standing to. I believe Ms. Sharma is a resident of Lakewood and has the right to address this council, Mayor Wilson said mildly. She had never been Caldwell's strongest ally. You have 2 minutes, Counselor. Thank you, Leila said. Rather than describe the evidence, I believe it would be more effective to show it. That was the signal. Throughout the chamber, screens lit up. Volunteers activated prepared tablets and phones. Someone connected to the council chamber's projection system. And suddenly, Councilman Caldwell's face appeared on every screen. Not his current face, stern with suppressed rage, but his face from the video, smug and conspiratorial as he detailed his corrupt plans. Once this vote passes, we can begin evictions immediately. I've arranged for the court schedules to be expedited. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Caldwell lunged for his microphone. This is doctored footage. This is slander. But his protests were drowned out by his own voice continuing from dozens of speakers throughout the room. Mercer? He's finished. By next week, the Chronicle will run a piece about his dishonorable discharge. Completely fabricated, of course. But his military records are sealed for national security reasons, so he can't disprove it easily. The chamber erupted in chaos. Reporters were already live streaming the revelation to their networks. The Suncrest executives present for their expected victory frantically headed for the exits, only to be intercepted by waiting FBI agents. Caldwell, realizing what was happening, abandoned dignity altogether. "Turn that off!" he shouted, pointing at the main projection. When no one complied, he rushed down from the council platform toward the audiovisual controls. Officer Rivera, Lakewood PD's liaison to the council, stepped into his path. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat." "Get out of my way," Caldwell snarled, attempting to push past. What happened next would be replayed thousands of times on social media. Councilman Royce Caldwell, the most powerful man in Lakewood, shoving a police officer and being immediately tackled to the ground, his perfect suit crumpling as he was handcuffed on the council chamber floor. "Royce Caldwell, you're under arrest for assault on a peace officer," Officer Rivera recited. "You have the right to remain silent." But there was more. As Caldwell was led away, FBI Special Agent Diana Chen approached the council table. In addition, Mr. Caldwell is being taken into federal custody on charges of public corruption, conspiracy to commit fraud, and civil rights violations. We have been investigating Mr. Caldwell for some time, and today's evidence concludes our case. The video continued playing on the screens, damning in its completeness. Caldwell's face, normally composed to political perfection, was contorted with rage and disbelief as he was escorted out. The mighty had fallen, and everyone was watching it happen in real time. In the midst of the commotion, Thad found himself standing next to Mayor Wilson. "Did you know?" he asked her quietly. "About Caldwell? About all of it?" She gave him a measured look. "I suspected. Many of us did. But suspecting isn't the same as having proof." She glanced at the doors through which Caldwell had just exited. "You've done this city a service, Mr. Mercer. A difficult, necessary service." As the reality of what had just occurred rippled through the council chambers, Thad caught Leila's eye across the room. She gave him a small, fierce smile that said everything. They had done it. Their dharma, their purpose, had been fulfilled. Justice sometimes takes time, but it comes for everyone eventually. If you believe in the power of ordinary citizens to hold the powerful accountable, share this video now. 3 months later, Thad stood on the porch of a newly renovated apartment in the Riverside complex, watching as Mrs. Alvarez cut a ribbon across her doorway. Her children cheered and neighbors applauded. The changes in Lakewood had been swift and far-reaching. After Caldwell's arrest, investigations uncovered corruption throughout city government. Several officials resigned, others faced charges. The Suncrest development deal collapsed completely. Most importantly, the truth about Riverside came to light. The building was structurally sound. The mold and wiring issues were real but fixable. After the city seized the property through civil forfeiture, it had been purchased with proceeds from Caldwell's corrupt dealings. A community trust was established to renovate the existing structures and keep them affordable for current residents. Guardian Watch had evolved from a watchdog site into a full-fledged nonprofit, with Thad as its executive director and Leila as chief legal counsel. They now trained citizens across the country to monitor local government and advocate for transparency. "I still can't believe it sometimes," Thad said as he and Leila walked back to their office, the actual office they now maintained above Dharma Cafe. "That it worked. That we won." "Justice isn't always instant," Leila replied. "But karma has a way of completing the circle eventually." They passed a newsstand with the Lakewood Chronicle's latest headline, "Former Councilman Caldwell sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Instant justice indeed." This story is based on real events, but true accountability happens every day in communities across America when citizens stand up for what's right. If you're inspired to make a difference in your own community, remember, the journey starts with a single step. Subscribe for more stories of ordinary heroes creating extraordinary change.